Hi friends! Welcome back to our reading corner. For those of you who don't know, my name is Maggie and I love reading. So today we'll be reading The Velveteen Rabbit by Margaret William with original artwork from William Nicholson. Let's get started. The Velveteen Rabbit, or How Toys Become Real. Here was once a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy, as rabbits should be. His coat was spotted brown and white, and he had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink satin. One Christmas morning, when he sat wedged on top of a boy's stocking, with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in the stockings, nuts and oranges, a toy engine, and chocolate almonds, as well as a clockwork mouse, but the rabbit was quite the best of all. For at least 2 hours, the boy loved him, and then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels. And in the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time, he lived in the toy cupboard or in the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys snubbed him. The mechanical toys were far superior and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas and pretending to be real. The modern boat, who had lived through 2 seasons and lost most of his paint, caught the tone from them and never missed an opportunity to refer to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he did not know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself, and he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion, who was made by a disabled soldier and should have had broader views, put on airs of pretending he was connected to the government. Between them, all the poor little rabbit was made to feel that he was very insignificant and commonplace, and the only person who was kind to him at all was the skin horse. The skin horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs on his tails had been pulled out to string necklaces on. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away. And he knew that they were only toys, and they would never turn into anything else, for the nursery magic is a very strange and wonderful thing. And only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced, like the old skin horse, understood this at all. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day, when they were all lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nana came in to tidy the room. "Does it mean having to do things that buzz inside of you and stick out?" "Isn't real how you were made?" said the skin horse. "It's the thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long time. Not just playing with you, but really loves you. Then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he had always been truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen to people who break easily or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you're real, most of your hair has been loved off, your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you're real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." "I suppose you are real," said the rabbit, and then he wished he had not said it, for he thought the skin horse might be sensitive, but the skin horse only smiled. "The boy's uncle made me real," he said, "and that was a great many years ago. But once you are real, you can't become unreal again." The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called real happened to him. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like, and yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was really sad. He wished that he could become real without these uncomfortable things happening to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes, for no reason whatsoever, she went swooping about like a great wind, hustling them away into cupboards. She called it tidying up, and the playthings all hated it, especially the tin ones. The rabbit didn't mind so much, for wherever he was thrown, he came down soft. One evening when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog that has always slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to go hunt for the china dog at bedtime. So she simply looked around, and seeing that the toy cupboard door was open, she made a swoop. "Here," she said, "take your old bunny. He'll do to sleep with you." And she dragged the rabbit out by the ear and pulled him into the boy's arms. That night, for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far over the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. As he missed too those long moonlit hours in the nursery, where all the house was silent in his talks with the skin horse. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him, and made nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes, and said that he could burrow like a real rabbit. And they had a splendid game together, in whispers, when Nana had gone away to her supper and left the nightlight burning on the mantelpiece. And when the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close to his little warm chin and dream, with the boy's hand clasped close around him all night long. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy, so happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was starting to get shabbier and shabbier, and that his tail was unsewn, and that all of the pink was rubbed off of his nose from where the boy had kissed him. Spring came, and they had longer days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. He had rides in a wheelbarrow and packed picnics on the grass, and lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower boulder. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go out to get tea, the rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dusk. And Nana had to come looking for him with a candle because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. He was wet through with the dew and quite earthy from diving into the burrows that the boy had made for him in the flower bed, and Nana grumbled and grabbed him off with a corner of her apron. "You must have your old bunny," she said. "Fancy all the fuss about this toy." The boy sat up in bed and stretched his hands. "Give me my bunny," he said. "You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was so happy, for he knew that what the skin horse had said at last was true. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was no toy any longer. He was real. The boy himself had said it. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. And into his boot-button eyes, that had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed in the morning when she picked him up and said, "I declare that if this old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression." That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived, there was a wood, and in the long June evenings, the boy liked to go out there and play tea. He took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play among the trees, he always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere in the bracken, where he would be quite cozy, if he was a kind-hearted little boy and he liked the rabbit to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants that ran to and fro between his velvet paws in the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall bracken near him. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They looked very well, like they were well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a queer way that made them move. One minute they were long and thin, the next they were fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same like he did. Their feet patted softly on the ground and crept quietly close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see which side of the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something winding them up, but he couldn't see it. There was evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all the time their nose twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. "Ho," said the furry one, "it's as easy as anything." He gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. "I don't believe you," he said. "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can play. I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, but he didn't want to say so. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all of one piece, just like a pincushion. He sat still in the bracken and hoped that the other rabbits didn't notice. "I don't want to," he said again. The wild rabbits had very sharp eyes, and this one stretched his neck out. "He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out. "Fancy a rabbit without hind legs?" he began to ask. I have hind legs," the rabbit confirmed. "I've got hind legs and I'm sitting on them." "Then stretch them out and show them to me," said the rabbit. He began to whirl around and dance, till the rabbit got quite dizzy. But all the while he longed to dance, for the furry new tickly feeling that ran through him, he would have felt anything, he would have given anything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came so close that this time his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen Rabbit's ear, and then he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. "You don't smell right," he exclaimed. "He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real." "I am real," said the little rabbit. "I'm real. The boy said so." He nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran near them. With a stomp of his feet and a flash of two white tails, the strange rabbits had disappeared. "Come back and play with me," called the little rabbit. "Oh, do come back. I know I'm real." But there was no answer, only the little ants that ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. "Oh dear," he thought. "Why did they run away like that? Why didn't they just stop and talk to me?" For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken, hoping that they would come back, but they never returned. And presently the sun sank lower, and the white little moths fluttered about. The boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all of his whiskers off, and the pink lining of his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and scarcely looked like a rabbit at all, except to the boy. To him, he was always beautiful, and that was all the rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real, and when you're real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then one day, the boy was ill. His face grew flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night, though all the little Velveteen Rabbit was there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes. He never stirred, for he was afraid that if he was found, someone might take him away. He knew the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the rabbit found it rather dull doing nothing at all day long. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again, and they would go and play in the gardens amongst the flowers and the butterflies, and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket just like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books while the rabbit cuddled close at his side. And then one day, they let him get up and get dressed. It was a bright sunny morning, and the windows stood wide open. They had carried the boy out to the balcony and wrapped him in a shawl. And the little rabbit lay tangled among the bedcloths, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all, and while the little rabbit lay under the bedcloths, with just his head peeping out listening, the room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with must be burned. Hooray, thought the little rabbit. Tomorrow we'll go to the seaside. And for the boy had often talked of the seaside and wanted to go see the very large waves come in. There were also tiny crabs and sand castles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. How about this old bunny? She asked. That, the doctor said. Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once. We can get him a new one. He mustn't have that one anymore. And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with an old picture book and a lot of rubbish and carried to the end of the garden behind the house. It was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy to attend to it. He had potatoes to dig and green peas to gather. The next morning he promised to come early and burn the whole lot. That night the boy slept in a different room, and he had a new bunny to sleep with him. It was a splendid bunny, all white and plush, with real glass eyes. But the boy was too excited to care very much about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that in itself was a successful thing that he could think about, and nothing else. And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books at the corner behind the house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, so by wriggling a bit, he was able to poke his head through the opening and look out. He shivered a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed. But this time, his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer any protection to him. Nearby, he could see the thicket of the raspberry canes growing tall and close like a tropical jungle. And in those shadows, he played with the boy for mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see that had all passed. Each beautiful morning after the other, the fairy huts and the flower beds, the quiet evenings in the woods where the ants ran between his paws, the wonderful days when he thought he was real, were over. He thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had been told. Of what use had it been to be loved and to lose one's beauty to become real? What did it matter if it ended like this? And a tear, a real tear, trickled down his little shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened, for where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground. A mysterious flower, not at all like the ones that grew in the garden. It was slender and green and the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry and just lay and watched it. And presently the blossom opened and out stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was made of pearls and dewdrops, and there were flowers on her neck and around her hair and around her face, like the most perfect fairy flower of them all. And she came close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed him on the nose. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her. It seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved. When they're old and worn out and the children don't need them anymore, I come and take them away with me and turn them into real." "I wasn't real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," said the fairy, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." She held the little rabbit close with her arms and flew him into the woods. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks, the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass. But when they saw the fairy, they stopped dancing and stood round in a ring to stare at her. "I've brought you a new playfellow," said the fairy. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know about Rabbitland, for he's going to live with you forever and ever." She kissed the little rabbit again and put him down in the grass. "Play, run, go, little rabbit." But the little rabbit sat quite still for a moment and never moved. For when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing about, he suddenly remembered about his hind legs, and he didn't want them to see that he was made of only one piece. He didn't know that when the fairy kissed him the last time, she had changed him altogether, and he might have sat there for a long time, too shy to move, if someone hadn't tickled his nose, and before he thought of what he was doing, he lifted his hind legs to scratch it. He found that he actually had hind legs. Instead of the dingy velveteen fur that had once been brown and soft, his ears now twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap of joy using those hind legs, so great that he went springing out of the turf with them, jumping sideways and then whirling around like the others did. He grew so excited that when he did his last stop, he turned to look at the fairy, but she was gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed, and then winter, and then to spring. When the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the wood behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from the bracken to peep at him. One of them was brown all over, while the other had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted, but some of the spots still shone through. And about his little soft nose and round eyes there was something familiar. So the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks like my old bunny that I lost when I had scarlet fever." But he had never knew that it was really his own bunny. The bunny had come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. The end. I hope you all enjoyed this story, and I'll see you next time.